What happens when one man tries to watch all the horror films of the 1980s? Well, we're about to find out because I'm your host, Josh Spiegel, and this is the 80s Project, 1981. Welcome back to the 80s Project, where I'm watching all of the horror films from the 80s. And when I say all, just note that I'm not hitting every single international film and TV movie. I'm sticking with either American films or international ones that made an impact on America, as we'll see in this very episode, since there are quite a few worldwide releases here, as we dip a bit further into 1981. Hey guys, before we start the movies, I want to take a moment to talk to you about my new sponsor, ExpressVPN. I don't think you guys know just how important that a good VPN service is to a guy like me who's trying to find all of these movies. I don't think you know how hard some of these things are to track down. Well, ExpressVPN can help me with all of that. First of all, it allows me unrestricted access to basically every part of the internet. Like, oh hey, that one random cannibal movie is only available on some Eastern European streaming service not accessible in the US? No problem, because with ExpressVPN I can simply switch my home country and watch it. Oh no, that one old Italian giallo is only available on some sketchy site that I know if I just visit, I'll be treated to about 1 million uncomfortable ads afterwards. No problem there either, because ExpressVPN will mask my IP address, so sites won't be able to use my data for ad tracking or other creepy stuff. What's that? That one old ghost story TV movie can only be found on some site that I don't trust whatsoever and may potentially be linked to some sort of phishing scheme? I'm not worried because ExpressVPN encrypts my network data with best-in-class encryption. Not even Angelina Jolie and Johnny Lee Miller will be getting my data, no matter how fast the Fisher Stevens types. And right now, if you click the link in the description below, you can try it out and get 3 months for free, which is plenty of time to track down those old zombie Templar night movies that you've been looking for. This block begins on March 27 with Eyes of a Stranger and starts with the discovery of a body of a woman that had been raped and killed. And it's a serial killer, and he likes to call and torment his victims first. And he kills Debbie here's boyfriend with, I guess, a really sharp meat cleaver that can cut someone's head off with one swipe. So there's newscaster Julie McCoy here, and she spots some suspicious behavior from her neighbor and also has a little sister who must be somebody's babe. Tracy is blind, deaf, and mute from a kidnapping incident that happened when she was a child, but she's pretty capable, able to navigate the apartment complex and do laundry. And Jane just can't seem to shake the feeling that there's something off with Stanley across the way. And this was originally conceived as a sort of a straightforward thriller and began shooting that way, but as they were in mid-production, the producers decided to ride the wave of the slasher boom and added scenes of gore in there and brought in Tom Savini to handle the effects. However, the added GRU got the film into trouble with the MPAA and slapped the film with an X rating, so they ended up cutting out most of the violence in order to get an R. Plot-wise, it's like part slasher flick, part Rear Window, and then the ending swings into Wait Until Dark territory, and it was by Ken Wiederhorn, who had a pretty eclectic career. He's the guy who brought us the zombie Nazi flick Shockwaves, but then was the guy who said, you know what Meatballs 2 needs? An alien. And then gave us Return to the Living Dead 2, and he kind of wavered between doing comedy and horror comedy throughout his career. But there's not a lot of humor here. It's a pretty serious film. But it didn't really make a splash at the box office, making just a little over $1 million against an $800,000 budget. I'm going with a 3 on this one. It's okay. It does everything kinda right, but it never really has that spark. Its horror cultural significance is a 2.5. It's kinda known, has some good names involved, and Savini effects going for it. Should you watch it? Probably. It's a decent watch. Our next entry came out in March with an unclear date, but it did play in January in Santa Fe as well, and it's Delusion, which tells us about Meredith taking a new job at a big mansion taking care of Mr. Langrock here, who's bedridden. And oh no, Large Marge is here! Prepare for nightmares! She meets the old man's lawyer and that night encounters his son, Wilfred, who has a mental disability, and also his grandson Gabriel from Jaws 2. And this kid is actually the nephew of Olympia Dukakis, and his stepfather was Michael Dukakis, and they shared the same last name because Michael actually adopted him as well. And John here's had a wild career. He was an actor in the late 70s and early 80s, went into politics halfway through the decade, but then shifted into the music industry in the 90s. Soon, there's dead dogs on the premises, and Meredith forms an obsession with Gabriel, and Wilfred is murdered by an unseen attacker. After the deaths continue, fingers are pointed at Gabriel, and here's a weird little tidbit about this one. It was released in '81 as Delusion, and featured this poster art, which seemingly just reproduces the famous painting All Is Vanity by Charles Allen Gilbert, but it was re-released 1 year later, in 1982, under the title The House Where Death Lives, and had a much more traditional poster. But years later, when it was put out on the home market, the VHS cover looked like this. And if that's not familiar, well, that's Henrietta from Evil Dead 2. And the image was likely just lifted directly from one of the stills from that movie. It's kind of weird that they ran with that, considering that nothing like this appears in the film whatsoever, and viewers could possibly be confused that this film was in some way related to the Evil Dead series. My rating here is a 2 because not only is it rather dull, it is really, really easy to figure out the mystery. Like 5 minutes in, you're gonna say, I bet this is what's going on, and you'll be right. Its significance is a 1.5. It's not really that well known, doesn't really feature any name stars, and didn't really make that big of a dent on the horror world. Should you watch it? You could probably pass.
Meredith, please.
I won't have it in the house. I won't.
Next, in March of 1981, without a known date, is Scared to Death, which potentially could have gone into the 1980 Project episodes since it did debut in France in November of 1980, but it got a regular US release in March and begins in the sewer with a weird alien-looking thing. And then a woman in her house alone is attacked and killed by some sort of creature. The police are on the case, and then Ted here is an ex-cop who's now a writer, and holy crap, this footage looks very, 70s. Oh, and he's also a private eye, and the creature continues its attacks, including some roller skaters, and it's this pretty kick-ass monster suit with an extended tongue. So if you're getting some real xenomorph from Alien vibes, you're realizing why this film is frequently lumped in with Alien ripoffs, and it's pretty obvious that the Giger design was a strong inspiration. And that's acknowledged by the director, William Malone, and this was his first feature film, although he'd later do Creature, another movie inspired by Alien, and the House on Haunted Hill remake. Before this, he worked in a mask factory and wanted to handle creating the film's monster himself, and stated that the alien was a big inspiration for his creation here, known as the Syngenor. The lead role was originally supposed to be played by pop star Rick Springfield, who bowed out 1 day before shooting, causing Malone to cast John Stinson very quickly. It was made for the extremely low budget of $74,000, and when Ted's new girlfriend is attacked and left in a coma, he finds out about the Syngenor, a laboratory-created creature that escaped, and this one is getting ready to reproduce. The movie was basically instantly profitable since Malone sold off the international rights for more than it took to make the movie, and went on to cult success, and the Syngenor creature became a bit more famous than the movie itself. It spawned a sequel in 1990 called Syngenor, and re-releases of this film were changed to say Scared to Death Syngenor in order to show that the two were linked. My rating on it is a 3. I enjoy this one, but I have to admit that it's nothing special, and quite a bit of it is really drawn out. That creature design is awesome though. Its significance is the same at a 3, since that creature design is widely known. Like that mask was everywhere in every mask shop for a while, and launching Malone's career is a big deal. But I feel like the movie itself isn't that well known, and it's still a bit of a cult classic. Should you watch it? Yeah, check it out. This next one doesn't have a confirmed release date, but it did come out in 1981 in Indonesia, and it's Mystics in Bali. It has Kathy here, and she's in Bali, which is in Indonesia, to learn about the black magic there. And when the film begins, she's with this guy, Hendra, who tells her about liak magic, a form of black magic. He says he can get her in touch with a man who can teach it to her, and oh boy, they encounter the witch queen of the liak, and this is not at all a disturbing thing right here, who asks them to get her jewels, and then reappears as this tongue thing to drink blood, and...
Good. Now I need you to take off your skirt.
Are we sure that this is a liak demon and not like Harvey Weinstein? Kathy continues to visit the Queen's turf in order to learn her ways, with each night getting more and more bizarre, with some pretty awesome transformation effects as they turn into pigs. And although this came out in Indonesia in '81, it didn't get released in the US until 1989, and this was the country's first attempts at making a film that catered towards an American audience, casting a white woman in the lead, although the plot is still distinctly Indonesian, and features elements directly from the folklore of that area. Oddly enough, Ilona Agatha Bastian, who plays Kathy, wasn't even an actress. She was a student that was visiting Indonesia on vacation from Germany, and the producer's wife discovered her and asked her to be in the film. And yep, this is the film that has that notorious bit with the severed head flying into a woman's house and eating her unborn child through her vagina. That is a thing that happens in this movie. Now, this was a real creature that was feared in the area. I mean, not, the creature wasn't real. It was a real fear in the area, called a penanggalan. I think that said that right, which was a head with its entrails still attached below it that would feed on menstrual blood or blood from birth, because the Indonesian folklore is way weirder than ours apparently. So it may not be extremely well known here, although it does have cult success. This film was a major sensation in its home country and is still one of the most successful films in the Indonesian market. And my rating on it is a 3.5. It's so much fun. It's just an insane movie with some really wild effects. It's not really a good movie, but damn is it a good watch. Its significance is a tough one. I mean, it's not that well known here, but internationally, particularly in Indonesia, it's like E.T. level. So I'm gonna split the difference and give it a 2.5. Should you watch it? Sure, it's weird and worth it. Another one with an unknown date but was out sometime in 1981 is Home Sweet Home. And this starts in the best way possible.
Hey, you want a beer? Hey!
And we get reports of an escaped mental patient, and he kills that guy, so I guess you could say that body was by Jake. Meanwhile, it's Thanksgiving and a bunch of people are getting together at Mr. Bradley's ranch, and one of them is Hocus Pocus's Vanessa Shaw in her very first role. There's also this kid whose name is, I guess, Mistake?
Rock and roll forever.
And Killer Jay shows up sounding like a shark. And he kicks off the killings with this pretty hysterical hood drop. And then, of course, starts to pick off the party guests, and in a bit different slant than a lot of the other slashers, just seems to be having a fantastic time doing so. And this slasher flick has something that makes it a bit peculiar for the era, in that it was directed by a woman. Not exactly a first, but it was definitely a rarity for the time period, and the first on the project. This was the director Nettie Peña's first feature film, and would remain her only one. She made a documentary in 2009, but this remains her only mainstream narrative work, and it got a bit more notoriety from being one of the UK video nasties, and was banned there, although it didn't get the whole prosecution treatment. Its placement there is pretty peculiar, considering that the violence in the film is particularly mild. There's not really a lot of gore or anything, and the attack scenes are so dimly lit that it's not like you can really see anything anyway. There really doesn't seem to be that much information about it, although if you see Jake Steinfeld, I guess you shouldn't mention this movie, because word is that he gets a little annoyed if you do. And I'm gonna give this one a 2 because I wanted to like it, but as I was watching it, I was just thinking, how far into this am I? Like 45 minutes? Well, I guess I'm on my way. I'm on my way. I mean, come on, just set me free, home sweet home. Its significance is a 2.5 since it's a rare horror slasher set on the turkey holiday, directed by a woman, features some soon-to-be famous faces, and got on the nasty list, but isn't really all that well known. Should you watch it? I'd skip it. It's pretty standard, except for Steinfeld's over-the-top performance.
It's gone. Look. It's in the hat. 3. Oh, it's gone. Wait. It's in the hat. 4. 4. Bye-bye. See you later. So long. Oops, welcome back. Oh, it's gone. Watch. Magic dust. Look. More dust.
Yet another one with an unclear date, but again, sometime in 1981, is Kiss Daddy Goodbye. This also had the alternate titles of Caution, Children at Play, and Revenge of the Zombie. So there's these two kids, Beth and Michael, and they have powers like telekinesis, and they're played by a real-life brother and sister, and there's also a small-town deputy played by former teen idol and heartthrob Fabian. If you don't know who this guy was, he was a major pop star in the 60s and 70s and acted in a ton of movies, like Elvis style. And by this point in time had mostly shifted towards acting, and his popularity had greatly declined. The kids live with their father, and their mother has died, and they also use telepathy to communicate, and there's also a biker gang that rolls up to their house, and when Pops tries to get them to leave, the gang kills him. Blanchard meets up with Texas Chainsaw's Sally while the kids try to figure out what to do with their dead dad because they're afraid to call the police since their dad always told them they'd be taken away because of their powers. And you know how the kids cope? By painting the corpse's face and then reanimating him to attack, and then send him out looking for the bad people. And the directing credit here goes to Patrick Regan, and this is his only work as a primary director, but he's done quite a bit of first and second AD roles. That's first and second or assistant director, and he worked in those roles on some bigger features. And let's take this time to discuss the 70s, 80s gap, because I know I've mentioned that in a few episodes before, and there's a particular feel to 70s horror, and a very particular one for 80s horror. And what we're seeing is this gradual shift from one to the other. And this movie absolutely still has a 70s flavor to it, even though some of the others in this same time frame felt more 80s. I know that is a totally subjective thing, but watching all of these in order, it's an interesting thing to try to pinpoint. And I'm giving this one a 1.5. It is really, really dull. So slow I almost fell asleep. Its significance is also really low at a 2 since it's not really remembered at all. It doesn't really do anything new or interesting. But I'll give it the 2 for the presence of Marilyn Burns and I guess Fabian, even though he's not really a horror guy. But he is a known entity. Should you watch it? You could safely pass.
Why? Why did you make Daddy into a weird thing? A zombie?
Well, this list has been a bit ho-hum so far, but that's about to change because on April 2nd in Italy, The Last Shark was released. You all know that I love Jaws, and that extends to Jaws ripoffs, and boy, was this one. Instead of starting with a girl swimming, we get a windsurfer who gets munched in the most spectacular way possible. And then there's this novelist named Peter Benton, and do you think that's intentional since the writer of the Jaws novel was Peter Benchley? Peter is the Apes' Brent, who we just saw on the project a few episodes ago with Nightkill, and there's also a corrupt mayor. Again, I'm sure just a coincidence. And then there's Quint here. Sorry, that's not Quint. It's just the man that John Landis got killed, Vic Morrow, father of Jennifer Jason Leigh. Surprise, surprise, the mayor doesn't believe that there's a shark out there somewhere and won't shut down the beaches because there's a big regatta coming up, so you know, tourism. Clearly, this is a Jaws ripoff and one of the most blatant of them. So blatant that you would think that Bruno Mattei directed it, but no, this is actually Enzo G. Castellari, who did a bunch of really fun action apocalypse flicks in the 80s and also did a little 70s film called The Inglourious Bastards, a title so awesome that I'm sure that eventually someone will remake it, or I guess just steal the name. It was released 1 year later in 1982 in the US under the title Great White, and Universal tried to block the release, claiming that it was obvious plagiarism.
Come on, zoom in.
Before anything took effect, the release happened, and the film was a pretty huge success, bringing in around $20 million in the first 2 weeks. It never went any further though, since Universal won the suit, and the film was yanked out of theaters. The money it raked in was still enough to make it extremely profitable though, and Enzo considered making a sequel called The Last Shark 2, but because their mechanical shark prop was damaged, and they'd have to make another one, they never went forward with it. Oddly, it's not considered the biggest Jaws rip, since that honor would go to Cruel Jaws, which was directed by Bruno Mattei, and that one would also recycle footage directly from this one. And this one gets a 3.5 from me. It's a lot of fun, but then there's some big old boring gaps in that fun that drag on a bit. Its HCS is medium at a 2.5 since it is known, was pretty successful, and features Vic Morrow, but most of its notoriety is for being a knockoff. Should you watch it? Yes, you should, especially if you enjoy big, silly, practical sharks. We're staying in Italy for a bit because 2 days later, on April 4th, Lucio Fulci's Black Cat was released. And anytime Lucio's in a block, I'm happy. It starts with a car crash and the kitty of the title, and A Clockwork Orange's Patrick McGee is here in a role that was meant for Peter Cushing, who passed because he thought Fulci's films were too gory. Mimsy Farmer is here as well, and she had previously worked with that other Italian master, Dario Argento, in Four Flies on Grey Velvet. And here's an interesting note about her. In the 90s, at around age 50, she left acting to become a sculptor and found some big success with her works being used in the theater and big films like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Guardians of the Galaxy. And it's not an Italian horror flick without Al Cliver, and this won't be the last Fulci flick we see him in this year. And hey, speaking of people we'll see in that other 81 Fulci movie, David Warbeck is here too, as a police officer looking for a missing girl. Miles claims to be able to talk to the dead and is just kinda creepy, but Kitty's like, dude, your moves are weak, and also the cat kills people. And I suppose you could say that it's loosely based on the Edgar Allan Poe story of the same name, although that was pretty short, and this feature-length film obviously elaborates on it quite a bit. It contains one of the wildest burn sequences in film history, featuring both this wildly thrashing dummy and the most obvious stuntman in a burn suit. I guess this scene also proved to be pretty deadly in its own right when a breakaway stunt wall accidentally collapsed and fell on the actress. Like most Fulci films, the plot kind of rambles around a bit, although this is a bit more restrained than some of the others and does have a very Poe-like feel to it, because one thing Lucio did well was atmosphere. Although released in Italy in '81, it didn't get distribution until 1984, and in between some of his more splashy flicks, this one tends to get a little lost in the mix, but it's still pretty well regarded, although more standard work from the director. I'm giving this one a 3. I love me some Fulci, but this one's just a touch too slow and not much happens for a little too long. Its significance is also a 3 because it's Fulci and features a bunch of his regulars and has that Poe tie-in, but is still one of his lesser-known entries. Should you watch it? Yes, it's still a good, moody watch. We're now traveling to Spain, and we're spending a bunch of time overseas in this episode, but on April 10th, Night of the Werewolf was released. It starts with Elizabeth Bathory being sentenced to death along with her coven, and one of them is Waldemar Daninsky, who they say is a werewolf, and he's played by Paul Naschy, who we've already seen on the project with The Beast's Carnival. Daninsky is killed by a silver dagger, and it then jumps to present day with a group of college kids. But oh no, there's grave robbers! And I'm sure that grave robbing is still a thing, but is it wishful thinking to hope that they all still dress and act like you'd expect them to? And if you're not familiar with Naschy and Daninsky, this is part of a long-running series of 12 films to feature the character. The series is unconnected though, with no real continuity between them, although I guess I'll have to do a timeline video on them at some point, but they ran from 1968 to 2004, and this was the 9th entry. Each of these movies had a werewolf named Waldemar Daninsky and were quite successful in Spain. An interesting note is that one of the films in the series, The Knights of the Wolfman, is thought to be lost, with no copies still existing. Although, weirdly, it's also possible that the film didn't exist in the first place, like no one had ever seen it, including Naschy, although he says he wrote it and starred in it, but the director died right after filming, and the film negative was possibly discarded by the labs when it went unpaid for. But there's also some that claim that it was never actually shot, and that Naschy is confusing the filming for a different film. But it's up in the air at this point. But I'm getting off topic because that's not this film, Night of the Werewolf. In this one, those robbers removed that dagger, returned the werewolf to life, and that was the Spanish translated title of this one, The Return of the Werewolf. And he saves the girls from the group of bandits, but also goes on the prowl. And this is a pretty fun wolf design, but I guess call it blasphemy. But I sort of miss when werewolves looked more like people than wolves. But when Lady Bathory is back as well, Waldemar has to defend his new love against her, leading to a badass 80s underworld style vampire versus wolf showdown. And my rating here is a 3.5. This is some good fun. It's not great, it suffers a bit in the middle from some lag, but it's got great costumes, effects, and sets. Its significance is a 2.5 because Naschy's Hombre Lobo movies never really caught on here and were a cult success at best, but this is decently known. Should you watch it? Yes, recommended. Our final movie for this block is also from April 10th, although it did have some smaller screenings before that, but April 10th is when it went national, and it's The Howling. This has John Steed and R.J. Fletcher working on a TV news show with Elliot's mom on the hunt for a serial killer, and hey, Roger Corman. They find Eddie and shoot him while Karen is there, and she goes into a form of shock, developing amnesia. And she has a co-worker named Chris, played by Dennis Dugan, and this was kinda one of his more prominent roles, but most of his later acting work is in Adam Sandler films, and in fact, he's been the director for a laundry list of Sandler flicks like Happy Gilmore, Big Daddy, both grown-up movies, That's My Boy, and of course, the Oscar-winning, Nobel Prize-winning Jack and Jill. To help her cope with her trauma, her therapist sends her to a place he's a part of called the Colony, where a Dracula lives, as does the lovely Marcia, played by Elizabeth Brooks, who was kind of mad about the movie after its release because she did a nude scene in it that they told her would be tasteful and mostly covered by smoke, but when it was released, well, there was no smoke. Major King Kong is here as well, and it's clear that there's something unusual happening, especially when outside at night. There's that howling that they talk about in their title, and directing here was handled by Joe Dante in his follow-up to Piranha, and the success of this film is what inspired Warner Brothers to bring him on board to handle this little movie called Gremlins, and was a part of the werewolf revolution of the time. Between this movie and American Werewolf, the genre would sort of be revitalized, and the advancement of special effects gave lead to some amazing creature transformations. Funny enough, Rick Baker, who would end up winning an Oscar for his effects work on American Werewolf, was supposed to do the effects for this movie. But when he was offered that job, he left The Howling, but gave the gig to his assistant, Rob Bottin, launching his name into prominence in the effects world. It's still strongly debated which of the two films had the more effective woof out, but honestly, they're both pretty fantastic in their own ways. It also has roles for Mr. Futterman, Forey Ackerman, as well as the very first film role for the Doctor, and not Who, but you know, the Star Trek one. And this one was a big success since it was made on a tiny budget of $1.5 million and pulled in just under $18 million at the box office and spawned a franchise with about 7 sequels, and is pegged for a remake in the near future with It director Andy Muschietti directing, although there's been no word on that for a while. And my rating here is a 4. This is a great film and the effects are show-stopping, and it's a classic tale that's sharper than you'd think. I'd put it higher if the second act wasn't a bit too low-key, but there's so much to love here. Its significance is a 4.5 though, since it's a landmark for creature work with big names attached to it, and it was the push to the mainstream for Dante and had a huge roster of genre stars. This is a hugely influential film. Should you watch it? Yep, it is a treat.
Tonight I'm gonna show you something. Make you believe.
So there you have it. This block was a bit weaker, but I tell you, looking ahead at the rest of 81, there's not many others like this. There's a ton of gold on the way, and the best one here was, without question, The Howling. It's a great film any way you slice it. But let me know which of these was your favorite. Let me know which of these you've seen and which ones you'd now like to see based on this. Which one of these you've never heard of. I want to hear all that down below in the comments. And also, please, if you enjoyed the video, hit the like, subscribe, and go to my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines and help keep the project going. And the project will keep going because, yeah, we're only like 3 episodes into 1981. There's lots more to go just in this year, and then lots more to go for the rest of the 1980s, because we're going to hit it all here on the 80s Project.